Hi, this is Gabrielle Moreski, adventure traveler on Travel Fuels Life.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Travel Fuels Life, the show that encourages, educates, and inspires you to make your travel dreams come true. I'm your host, Drew Hanisch, and in this inaugural episode, I think it's time to introduce you a little bit to Travel Fuels Life and how you can take part in the community. We have a website, and that website is travelfuelslife.com, and I invite you to go there. Check it out. It's kind of the hub for everything we do for travelfuelslife.com. You'll find the podcasts there. You'll also find show notes. And there I'll provide some links so you don't have to sit there and madly write stuff down while you're listening to the podcast. If we mention any links or anything like that or products, then we'll make sure to post those on the show note page. So you can check that out, one for each episode. And there's also a box down there at the bottom for you to be able to comment if you want to do that as well. So it's a good chance for you to get some feedback in there, take part in each of the episodes, because we want this to be about the Travel Fuels Life community and helping you to become a better traveler. So the more you let us know how you like things, or if there are some things you'd like to hear about or suggest, then you can do that right there on the show notes pages. And we also actually have a phone number, which you'll find on the website. It's a toll-free number that you can call to leave your questions for the show. Who knows, maybe we'll do some episodes down the road or filter in some of your questions and put them on and answer those at the end of the show or in special episodes. So it's something to look forward to. And also, if you go to Travel Fuels Life, you will find the .com, travelfuelslife.com. Make sure to put that in there. Then what you're going to find are some links up in the upper right-hand corner. Those are all our social media outlets. So right now it's me. So, I have so many hours in the day and there's just so much that I post, but I will tell you that right now I am very active on Instagram. I have been on there for about a year, posting all sorts of pictures and stories from my trips, so you can check those out. I've got some blog posts up on that site as well, and some of those are just some personal journeys. You'll find out that I'm a James Bond fan and some of my trips that I've taken doing that. And I did a very interesting bourbon trip and have a guide up there for you to be able to do a Kentucky bourbon trip if you wanted to do such a thing. So you can find all that information up there on the site as well. And you'll also find links to YouTube and a Facebook group and so on and so forth. So we'll talk more about those things as we go along. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that Facebook group and how you can leverage the power of the Travel Fuels Life community as it grows. We're going to have a little crowdsourcing program going on there, and so I will tell you a little bit more about that coming up. But right now, it's time to get this episode kicked off, and I am honored to have a fantastic guest that I think is going to cut right to the heart of what I want this show to be about and what I want it to achieve for you, which is to inspire you to stop making excuses and saying, oh, maybe when I retire, I'll travel, or maybe maybe that trip is a little bit too aggressive for me. I don't know if I have the courage to go out and do this or do that. She's going to really inspire you because she is a female solo adventure traveler, and she's hiked and biked in some amazing places throughout Europe, India, and she's about to take a big trip here in the United States, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that as well. So here to raise the bar on what you think you can do and achieve as a traveler, I'd like to welcome Gabriella Moreski. Gabriella Moreski. I was going to ask you before we got started. And is it Moreski or is it?
Moreski,
okay.
yes. Mm-hmm.
As somebody with a last name Hanisch, it gets butchered all the time. So very good. All right. So I welcome you to the show. And
Glad to be here.
I excited to have you as our initial guest because I think that what I've seen in the world of travelers or people who want to travel is this hesitation to go out and stretch themselves or excuses as to why they can't do this or they can't do that, whether it's fear, whatever it may be. And I think having somebody who has actually gone out and done solo trips and done adventure trips is a good way to kind of raise the bar of expectation for people and get them to go, maybe I could pull this off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to get things kicked off, I guess the first thing is to sort of define what do you consider adventure travel? What does adventure travel mean to you?
Well, I think to me, I guess because I'm an introvert and not a big joiner, to me adventure travel is like going off by myself. And it's also having a destination in mind, maybe a beginning point and an end point, but nothing in between planned.
Right.
So I don't make reservations. I just kind of go.
Nice.
And then I meet other travelers along the way, and then people will say, "Oh, go here, go there." And whenever someone says, "Oh, you must see such and such," I always go there and have an amazing time. So I just kind of. I think I say it's about being present and being flexible and being open, and so that you have the room to go on side adventures that someone suggests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, I am the opposite when it comes to how I plan trips. I mean, I have every single place plotted out, and that whole idea of going, I don't know where I'm staying tonight. I mean, that's
I love that.
Yeah, and so that fuels you as and keeps you going. Have you ever bumped into a situation where you've gone, what am I going to do tonight? Because I just don't have. There isn't a place for me to stay. Or
sure, it happened to me in the Czech Republic when I had. I had a long day walking, and it was probably a 10-hour day. And I got to this small town. And I saw a young gentleman there, and I said, "Where's the pension? Can you direct me to the pension?" He says, "Well, there's no pension here." And so I'd been in the woods all day long, and I was ready for a nice shower and relaxing, and in the outdated book I had, it said there was accommodations in this town, and it turns out there weren't accommodations anymore. And in that moment, I burst into tears, and he said, "Wait, just sit here." And he came back with his father, who speaks German, and I speak German. And he said, "Look, no problem. I called the next town. There's a horse farm. They're having an event tonight, but they have a little space for you, and it's just another 2-kilometer walk." And I was like, "Yes." And I walked 2 more kilometers, and I showed up at this horse farm, and it turned out the event was Cowboy and Cowgirl Night.
Oh, wow.
So here I am in the Czech Republic listening to a band playing cowboy music in Czech.
Nice.
It turned out to a better evening than I could have planned anywhere.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, those little pleasant surprises. You mentioned that, and when I went to Pilsen this past summer, when I got to the hotel, they said, "Are you here for the festival?" And I went, "Festival? What festival is that?" And they said, "Oh, it's the Liberation Day Festival." And I went, "Okay, whatever that is." I go downtown, there's nothing but American flags everywhere. People are wearing red, white, and blue. They're playing jazz music. The Count Basie Orchestra is playing.
Right.
And there's tanks in the street, or not tanks, but military vehicles in the street. And I'm going, what is that? And they're all American, right? And there's all these Czech people dressed up and speaking Czech, but they're all wearing this. And I'm going, what is going on here? Well, apparently the story goes that when George S. Patton came into town and liberated Pilsen, after a while he was told to evacuate because the Russians were going to move in. Oh. And the Russians, for all those years that they controlled the Czech Republic, said, "We're the ones that liberated Pilsen." And in the end, when communism moved out and they became their own, after the revolution, became their own country again, the old timers said, we have to celebrate who really did.
Yeah, they could rewrite that story.
Yeah, but that was just a festival I just bumped into
Yeah.
that you don't, and that's the fun part about taking those kinds of adventures.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had heard actually on one of your on another interview about a brothel. What was that all about?
Oh, so this was when I was, I walked from Prague in the Czech Republic to Tübingen in Germany. And it was my last day in Prague, and it was a rainy, overcast day. It was about middle afternoon. I always like to get a cup of coffee. And I was coming out of the woods, and ahead of me, and I think about that time, I'd like a cup of coffee. And it's a Sunday, and it's raining. And I see this sign on a house, and it's flashing open. Well, this is Europe. It's a Sunday, and you never see neon flashing signs in Europe saying open on a Sunday. So, of course, I thought, I'm going in there.
Right.
And I go in there, and there's a young man sitting on the sofa, and I walk past him. There's like a bar, and I go up to the bar and order a coffee and end up talking to the woman, and I realize I'm in a brothel.
Oh my! Well, how do you excuse yourself from this situation?
Oh no! I actually tell them who I am. I'm a pilgrim, and I'm hiking along the pilgrim trail, and I show my passport. That it's a pilgrim passport, and they love my story, and they say, "Oh, and can we give you some whiskey for your coffee?" And I'm like, well, not today, but thank you. And they end up wanting to hear my story, and I guess poor gentleman sitting on the sofa was getting ignored for a little while, and then after my coffee, they escorted me out, helped me on with my backpack and my poncho, and waved me off.
Oh, wow.
And they both said, "Oh, well, we'd like to do that one day." And I said, "Yeah, awesome, great."
That's awesome. Well, and that's the cool thing too, is being able to encourage other people by just when you're doing it. Although Europeans seem to love to travel a lot. Yeah. And I think that's kind of it's a mystery for a lot of people here. How do you do that? But they have so many cultures within a small space.
Yeah. And also the culture over there is like, on the Eurovelo, if you go online to eurovelo.com, there's like 66,000 kilometers of hiking and biking trails.
Wow.
And when I bicycle in Europe, I don't even take a helmet because you're in the woods, you're off the main roads, it's safe, and locals don't wear helmets.
Oh, wow.
And, you want to blend in like a local.
Yeah.
And so, that exists, and you could be, walking through the woods by yourself all day long, and it's normal over there. So people are used to walking through the woods.
Right.
And every Sunday afternoon, you walk from one village to the next, have your coffee and cake, and walk back.
That's awesome. So where did your love for walking first and being able to take those kind of trips? Who inspired that, or was there somebody, or was it just something internal?
Well, my mother had what's called Wanderlust. And she always said, travel while you can. And so I would, when I was younger, I would take off and go to places. But I think the whole adventure travel really got started when I had a farm, and a young man, Fozzie, came from England to work at my farm through the WOOF, Willing Workers on Organic Farms program. And he would work during the day. In the afternoons, he would work on his book. So he came to kind of have a place where he could quietly write his book. Well, he would let me read his book as he was writing it, and it was about his walking across the Camino.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first introduction to this whole concept of being able to walk across the country. So years later, I met another woman who had said, "Oh, yes, I walked the Camino." And I thought, I knew about it from two people now. And so the third thing is for me to make a decision to walk the Camino. That day, I hadn't told anybody I made this decision, but I just internally decided to do that. That day, I got a package in the mail, and when I opened it, it was Fozzie's book that he had published.
Oh, wow.
And it was a sign from the universe to me, this is a really good decision.
I love how that happens. It's like you just need a little validation, and it's like, okay, this is it.
That was it.
Yeah. That's awesome. The Camino is a walk that I wanted to take before, and I thought that's it's actually kind of a good baby steps.
Yes.
If you were going to want to go learn how to walk on your own, there's a lot of people on that trail, right?
Very social, very
Yeah.
social. And I never actually walked by myself. I mean, sure, bits and pieces, but you end up falling in with a group of people, and then you meet another group of people. So it's always very social. And I actually walked the northern route. And the year I did it in 2010, 250,000 people had walked the Camino. And of that, only 50,000 had walked the Northern Trail. And I walked it in September. And so there was no issue with accommodations. And you stay at Pilgrim hostels.
Okay.
And yeah, first I walked with a group of Frenchmen. And then I walked with a group of Spaniards, and then I ended up walking with 2 Germans. and whenever you meet someone on the Camino, the 2 main questions are, where did you start, and why are you walking the Camino? And you had these amazing conversations.
Oh, I bet. There's have you ever seen the movie The Way?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And for everybody listening, if you haven't seen it, the Camino is I guess. The walk actually ends at Santiago de Compostela, which is the church where they say one of the apostles, St. James' bones are buried.
Yeah.
And so that's why it became such a pilgrimage for people to take that road. But in that movie, if you want to get introduced, I guess, to the culture, and how much did that feel like the culture?
Very true.
Okay.
It was spot on, and the only difference is that trail went through the St. Francis route, which is the most popular trail, and a little maybe challenging to get accommodations because it's become so popular. So the only difference is just the route that I took, but the concept is the same. The idea is that you're a pilgrim. This is a walking pilgrimage, and you're in meditation, and you're thinking about your life and maybe decisions that you want to make. And so, and it's interesting that people that show up along the way kind of, help you in that process, or we help each other in that process of figuring out life's questions.
That's awesome. And honestly, I think one of the things that draws me to the idea of walking is that being in information technology and social media and all the rest, it's like we're just inundated with information. And a lot of people in that industry are now trying to learn meditation as a way to go. And I try to meditate. It's very hard to get those voices in your head to calm down and actually be able to feel like you're getting some insights, but it happens. But I can imagine, the first thing that I thought about taking a long walking trip like that is how lonely I would be, or how after a little period of time I'd feel like, okay, why am I doing this? That's not the experience, I'm guessing, that you get out of that.
Yeah, so I think on the Camino it was very very social, and then the next trip I did was walk the Czech Republic walk, and that was I was by myself every day, all day long, and I'm good with that. So it is like you can meditate while you're walking because you're in nature and you're enjoying nature. And I would always say that I would make my best business decisions after a month of walking through the woods, because then it's that distance that you get.
Yeah.
From whatever it is that you're engaged in, and sometimes you can see it, through the telescope, and move away, and see things differently. And I don't know. I found I had time to really think about things and make good decisions.
Right. That's good. Hey, maybe we should get some CEOs to go walk the woods before they decide their next plan, right?
Yeah, you'd certainly get connected to yourself.
Yeah.
And nature.
It's funny because I do road trips, and the idea of road trips for me is it's my chance to detach.
Exactly.
And sometimes I will, being the ADD guy I am, it's good to have the road and the scenery kind of going by me as a distraction, so that my mind can kind of find its channel and I get my creative thoughts in that kind of thing.
Right.
What I found interesting on my last road trip to Kentucky, though, was that when I got out of the car to take some pictures, I started seeing things that I'm like, I'm looking at the flowers, I'm smelling the air, I'm looking around me, and I'm going, here's the thing I think I'm kind of missing in doing these road trips, or I heard somebody say that the interstate highway system was built so that you could drive coast to coast and not see anything.
Right.
And so that's kind of the feeling I got when I was like, okay, I'm going to go off on a little U.S. highway. I'm going to see what it's like. And then I was seeing these little towns and getting more of a feel, but feeling like I was still kind of getting the, quick Cliff Notes version instead of actually getting to enjoy it. So you're kind of on the other extreme of that. And so do you ever feel like maybe I should speed this up a little bit, or you just kind of soak in all of that time?
Well, actually, I felt when I transitioned from walking to bicycling, I'd be on the bike and I'd think, oh, this is just a little fast.
Right.
And it's going a little too fast, and I want to slow it down and maybe get off and just walk the bike for a little bit to kind of, be more grounded and be more noticing. And I love to take pictures. And when you're walking, it's just so easy to spontaneously stop and take pictures. And on the bike, you got to stop and, kind of think of where you're stopping. And so it's just a little bit more involved. But, I found, I think I prefer... I like the walking, but I had to transition to bicycling because I decided to, didn't have to, but I was going to Ireland, and in Ireland they don't have through walking trails. You can drive here and then hike and then drive and then hike, and I didn't want to do that. So I thought, well, okay, then I'll just go on rent a bike and bicycle Ireland.
Right.
And so then going from walking and carrying that backpack to the bicycle carrying the backpack,
Wow.
I thought, well, this is easy peasy.
Right. Let's do this.
But a little faster.
Yeah.
A little faster.
So is that what sold you on it? I mean, do you still do walking trips, or are you more predominantly biking now?
Now I guess I'm predominantly biking.
Okay.
And I think because of, sometimes like I'm going to be doing the Continental Divide, and you would have to carry so much weight on your back that I'm not sure that would be an issue that I'd want to take on. You have to carry food and all that. And that's why in Europe I would walk again, because in Europe you walk from village to village and there's really good quality food.
All right.
And here, when you're walking, these like the Continental Divide, you go long distances without access to food, and it may be fast food at some point, which is not on my agenda.
Right.
So all those things are a factor and play into it.
Yeah, that can be tough. As part of planning out a trip for me going to the Four Corners was I'm going to have long stretches between these towns, and what am I going to be able to eat? Yeah. And I live on TripAdvisor for doing my planning. So I'm thinking, how do you just cruise into a town and hope? Because one thing about Europe is that restaurants are not always open. Like I found traveling through Germany that if I got to 2:00 in the afternoon, I was out of luck.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that case? You just kind of say, okay, I'm not going to eat this time, or you take some trail mix with you, or what do you?
I always have something to snack on. And, actually in Germany, there was plenty of apple trees on my trail. And I'd pick up apples. And I had apples to eat for days because they were just on the side of the road. And I remember in the Czech Republic getting to, I was out in the middle of nowhere, I guess, and it was a Sunday, and I was getting hungry, and I saw a place, but they weren't open. But then, I could see the numbers, and I saw where they're going to open in half an hour. So I'll just hang out here and wait and, do my journaling. And these two bicyclists came by while I was sitting there, and they said, we're hungry, we got to eat right now. I said, well, half an hour, we'll be open. And they said, no, we got to, and they were going on. They didn't choose to wait.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say, well, the next town you go to is going to be closed too because it's Sunday. You may want to wait, just chill for half an hour, and
Right.
the food's coming here.
Wow, yeah.
But somehow it always works out. I was actually coming out of the woods in the Czech Republic one afternoon, and it was like, time for coffee, and I see this commotion up ahead, and these people are dressed up in medieval outfits, and for a minute there I thought, well, where am I? And when I come out, I realize it's a movie shoot. And, with a movie shoot, there's always food involved.
Right.
And so I turn the corner, and there's a table, and there's a big coffee urn. And I ask someone there, I say, I'm a pilgrim, I walked from Prague, and, that was days ago, and can I get some coffee? So in the middle of nowhere, in the woods, I get coffee.
Nice. Yeah, well, I think that's another part of travel that I got out of the stuff that I've heard you talk about up to this point, is the helpfulness of people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that the way to do a solo trip is to just be open.
Exactly.
To the help.
Yeah, and I think it's having that confidence and knowing that people do want to help.
Right.
And I think the thing about being solo, I think sometimes I see couples or groups I consider them like a closed unit, so they're not always approachable. But when you're by yourself, you are more vulnerable. But at the same point, you're more open, and people will talk to you, and it's easy to approach people because you're open. And,
right.
And so I have always found that I've always found that people want to help, and I've never had a bad experience. And people will just say, "Wow, yeah," and want to guide me or give me directions or point me in the right way. And so it always works out as an interesting interaction.
Yeah. It's fun to. It's fun to go up and talk to people. It's funny you say you're an introvert, because I consider myself an introvert too, but I'm a talker and I love learning from people.
Yeah.
And to me, what I found is that people love to open up.
Yeah.
I learned more about the Czech Republic from talking to the guy who I was staying in his Airbnb, and we just got into an hour-long discussion about the history of the Czech Republic.
Well, I had actually two experiences along those lines, and one was in the Czech Republic again, and it was a couple having lunch. And in Europe, it's normal to sit down and share a table with other people. It's not like this is my exclusive table and you can't sit here. So anyway, I sat down with this couple, and I learned exactly a lot about the Czech Republic from hanging out with them. And then they were on bicycles and I was walking, but later on we crossed paths again and had another discussion, and it was just, this wonderful interaction. And then this last trip I took this year was in Russia, and I ended up in a sauna with my host and two friends, and I were these esteemed Russians, and so we get there and say, so what's the origin of the Russian language? And what ensues is this, a whole hour-long conversation about the origin of the Russian and the language and the history, and
wow.
It just, people love to share.
Right.
And it just unfolds, and just allow that to happen.
Yeah, it's like a big opening to our culture and saying, hey, check us out. I think the thing that I found in terms of travel is that, especially Americans, I think, get a feeling like we're not well liked anywhere else, and so that kind of is an excuse not to travel. But I find it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
People are curious; they want to know, and they'll ask you questions, and it's great because you get to give them a slice of something other than what's on the news or the narratives that are being created. So.
And maybe change their impression of a foreigner.
Right.
And so they see and I think it's that whole human to human connection, and that's what we want to do more of, and break down those barriers. And I think sometimes, it's so easy to be in our comfort zone of separation.
Right.
And I think that's the wonderful thing about I get lost. And I think that's a blessing, because then I ask people for direction and end up having a good interaction. And so I think that's the way it forces me to break down those barriers and actually talk to people.
Right. Well, and how hard is it for you to approach people? Do you just, do you have kind of your antenna up and you sort of selective on who you might go over and talk to, or
no? If I'm lost, it's the very first person that comes along.
Help, please. Yeah.
But. Yeah, I had one time it was evening, and I was still in the woods, and I remembered a gentleman had told me earlier. He said, "Now be careful, because after dark, the woods belong to the hunters." And I thought, well, I wonder what time that is. And then I heard a shotgun go off, and I saw a deer running across the trail ahead of me. And that's where it's so nice to have that whistle. And I got on my whistle, and I just blew and blew and blew my whistle. So the hunters knew that, it's not theirs quite yet until I got out of the forest. And then that was one of those evenings, it was dark, and I went to this little village, and everything was shut down. And that was one of those moments I was thinking, oh dear, I heard there's a B&B like 3 more kilometers down the road, but I don't want to go back into the woods and blah, blah. So I get to the last town in this village, and I happen to look in the window. At the same moment, this woman inside happens to look out. I have my book in my hand, and I point to my book, and she motions for me to come around to the front door. And so I show her the book, this pension where I want to stay, and her husband starts to give me directions, and she cuts him off, and he leaves. And then he comes back with the car. And she told him, you're going to take her to the pension.
Nice.
And then it turned out it wasn't a pension that was there anymore, and the people that lived there let me stay in their home.
Wow. Oh, man. Yeah, when you were talking about actually sitting down at a table with multiple people. I mean, we don't do that a lot here, so It's kind of it's a unique experience, and I wish we did more of it.
Yeah.
There was a place I went to in Maryland that wasn't in Maryland. It was in Pennsylvania. It was in the Amish village area, and it was you sat down at these big long buffet tables. And you learn so much from people just sitting down, even Americans to Americans, learning about. Yeah.
Well, when I had my farm, I pioneered the farm to table in South Florida, and I had I got big round tables with 10 people per table. You bought your ticket ahead of time, but there was no reserved seating. And I would say to people, you're going to sit down as strangers, but you're going to leave as friends.
Nice. Well, Gabriella, I want to go ahead and hit the pause button and have a chance for everybody to download the next episode where we'll continue our discussion. And I want to really kind of take you through from your wanderlust that came from your mother all the way through up to the Continental Divide trip that you have coming up in the future. So if you'll hang with us, everybody, we'll get in on the next episode. But before we get there, I want everybody to know that we have this Travel Fuels Life Facebook group that's just started up. And the idea behind that is to allow you guys to crowdsource some answers for each other. The idea being that I will post some questions each week, and you guys will have the opportunity to go in and post answers or read other people's answers and kind of have a conversation back and forth, because this is a community, and the idea there is to get everybody contributing to find the best answers to our travel questions. And the first 3 questions I put up there, one was on travel insurance. And so a lot of questions about that, and whether you need it, don't need it, where to get it, that sort of stuff. Also one about sourcing good low airfares and how to do that. And a third about finding a good off the beaten track destination. If you're like me, I'm not big on crowds. And so I like looking for those places that nobody really knows about, or traveling off season, that sort of thing. So that's really the direction of that particular question. And if you've got questions, we got a spot for you on there also where you can post suggested topics. And all you got to do to join the Travel Fuels Life Facebook group is basically go out and answer these questions 3. I'm not going to tell you what the questions are, but they are 3 simple questions. Answer those questions. It is a closed group, but that will open the door for you. And then just read our rules. And we want a really nice, friendly community where everybody's helpful. And so just read over those rules and get in the spirit of what that group is going to be about. To get there, you can go to Facebook. You can type in Travel Fuels Life and just look for the group. Or you can go to travelfuelslife.com. And all you've got to do is click up in the upper right-hand corner on the Facebook icon, and that's going to take you right there. All right, so that's it for this week's edition, so far, I should say first half, with Gabriella, and we're going to take off with episode 2 coming up next. I'm Drew Hanisch. Thanks for listening to Travel Fuels Life, and remember, the world's ready to unfold before you, so begin the journey.
Hi, this is Gabrielle Moreski, adventure traveler on Travel Fuels Life.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the inaugural episode of Travel Fuels Life, the show where we encourage, educate, and inspire you to make your travel dreams come true. I'm your host, Drew Hanisch, and if you were here last time, then you heard our great conversation with Gabriella Moreski. She is a solo adventure traveler, and she just has some fascinating stories of her travels. We heard a little bit about her travels to Czech Republic, and we heard some of her walking and biking experience, but we've got a whole lot more. And in fact, I really wanted to take her through a progression on this show and kind of get a feel for where she started in terms of dipping her toe in the water all the way up to this great trip she has planned coming up to the Continental Divide. So we'll get through all of that stuff, and I just want to remind you also that for show notes and that sort of thing, you can check out travelfuelslife.com, and anything that we talk about on here where we have links and that sort of thing, you won't have to scribble down notes. You can actually just go to the show notes page and check things out there, and also leave comments, if you will. So we appreciate it, and without further ado, let's jump into part 2 of our conversation with Gabriella Moreski. So let's wander into kind of a progression of your travel, starting with you took a trip to India, to near the Himalayas. Is that?
Yeah, that was in 2001.
Okay.
And that was a friend of mine was going to India and said, "Would you like to join me?" Mm-hmm. And yeah, sure. And so we walked in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
And the people were friendly, and being vegetarian, I just loved the food. Everything was fresh. And that was just walking from village to village.
Okay.
And just amazing. And there I had a story where we ended up in this one village, and usually when we'd walk to a village, we'd want to have some chai tea somewhere. Mm-hmm. And we got to this little village, and there's a young man outside, and we said, "Where can we get some chai?" And he said, "Well, we don't have a shop here, but I'll make you some tea." So he invited us into his home. We sat out on the porch, and it turns out he was a student, and he was interested in art. And he had some books tucked up in the eave that very carefully, very well taken care of. And I said, "So who are those books?" And he says, "Well, those are mine." And so I said, "Were you going to go to college?" And he says, "Well, we're a poor sheep herding family." Mm-hmm. And so that's not an option for me. So they had some honey, and I said, can I get some honey? Mm-hmm. And he says, "Well, come back tomorrow with a jar, and I'll give you some honey." So I came out by myself the next day with my jar. He gave me honey, wouldn't let me pay for it. His brother was there, and I met his mother, and his brother worked at the post office, and he actually accompanied me back down the mountain. And I said to him, "So what does it cost to go to a college here?" It turns out to be $500.
Really?
So I said, "Well, give me your address." And when I got back, I went to my neighbor and said, "How about if we sponsor him for college?" She says, "Yes, I'm in." So we sent him to college every year until he graduated.
Wow.
And became a teacher. And so I thought, this is direct giving at its best.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he would write me these wonderful letters, and he sent me honey for a couple of years until the post office said, "This has got to stop. This honey's leaking."
Oh, nice.
But he said, "You changed my life. You gave me something that my family couldn't do." Mm. And I said, "No, Jagraj, you did this. You opened your doors and you invited us in. Mm. You invited this change." And so and then we asked him after he graduated and became a teacher, said, "Well, do you have a young woman in the village we could sponsor?" And we didn't get a response on that one.
Oh, no. So, well, maybe so you may get a something in the mail one of these days. Yeah. That's awesome. So, I mean, did that kind of open you up to the idea of, was that kind of your first introduction that opened the door in your mind to saying, "Hey, I'd like to do more of this kind of travel," or was that before?
I'd always kind of traveled.
Okay.
In college, I would take off. I'd drop out of school to go travel and then go back. And so it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's degree because I would get the travel bug that my mother had given me.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah.
And when I go to Europe, I usually stay with friends or relatives. So I would go by myself, but it was more I would be stationed with people that I knew.
Right.
And so the Camino walk was the first time of just, going out and walking on my own and seeing what happens, and not, that was completely out of my comfort zone.
So here you're on the Camino, and then did you decide you were doing your next trip while you were on the Camino, or did that sort of evolve?
It evolves.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess it would, I need to get back to work, and then it would take a year to kind of percolate, and I realized what happens. So, for example, this year I went to Russia in June, May and June, and I came back, and then I realized I get a little antsy, and I'm processing the trip, and I put together a presentation and my skirts about the trip, and then this antsiness happens, and I realize it is me wanting to think about the next adventure. And then when I have that, so this year I decided to bicycle the Continental Divide in 2019, and then once I have made that decision, then I have my avenue of research. And then then I'm excited because I have something to engage in and go down that rabbit hole and read up on, and what bike am I going to get, and I think my gear is all good, but I have to recheck my gear, and just thinking about all that stuff.
Right.
So I think what happens is that I do an adventure, I come back, I chill and process, but then I want that excitement and that next adventure.
Yeah. So for a trip, I mean, that's going to be a long trip, is it not?
2.5 months.
Okay. Yeah. And so the process of planning for a trip like that, I mean, now that's next year, and you started planning for it actually.
I just decided in last month.
Okay.
And then it'll be next July 14th. And that trip I decided I'm not doing solo because, I researched where all the bear attacks are, and it is kind of like along that line. But I didn't want to be out there by myself days at a time. It felt a little too exposed, and there is Grizzly Alley, and I was reading in the book, there's one campground that says no tent camping due to grizzly bears, and one thing or another, and I thought, I'm not sure I'm really up for that, and psychologically, I've done, usually my average is 400 miles at a time by myself.
Okay.
So psychologically, to go from 400 miles to 2,500 miles,
yeah.
I wanted some support for that.
Yeah.
So I signed up with Adventure Cycling.
Okay.
And they do all these wonderful maps around the United States and adventure travel stories. And so they lead this, and it's just 12 people. We camp every night. We prepare food together. And so then, so the nice thing is that it's van supported that carries your camping gear and carries the kitchen.
Oh yeah, this is a mint on a pillow kind of thing.
This is easy peasy, yeah.
But still a great adventure,
steep.
Amazing.
It's going to be steep, and the reason I decided that's because I moved to Asheville area. And I realized all these mountains here, it's just perfect training.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought, well, what matches what I'm doing now, which is, mountain biking and road biking and hiking. And so I thought, the Continental Divide,
yeah.
Country to country. So it kind of being in this space helped make that decision of what was next.
Yeah.
But I have a whole binder full of my bucket list of trips. I have Excel spreadsheets and all that.
Wow. So I'm thinking the Appalachian Trail will actually be a little easier to do after doing that Colorado and Rocky Mountains all the way up through Montana, all of that. I mean, that's going to be a lot of terrain you're climbing and dropping.
And I just got an awesome bike, a Kona Sutra, and I love that bike, and I'm just really excited. And now, I got the right gear.
Yeah.
And so, what they say is, if you got the right gear, you're good.
Yeah.
And I think after the Continental Divide, I feel the pull to go back to Europe and want to do a little more traveling, walking or biking in Europe. So, but then I had an opportunity. I got an email from a friend that said, I booked this bicycle trip across Madagascar and I can't go. Would you go in my place? And it's next month and it's 500 miles. So I checked the airfare and said, yeah, sure.
Right. Why not? And that was with a group?
That was with a group, yeah.
So because you've been doing so much traveling on your own, how is it adjusting to having a group?
Well, that was the first time I'd done a group trip.
Uh-huh.
And I did have anxiety before I went about, adjusting to the group thing. And it was great. They were mostly Kiwis. So they were just really fun people and good stories. And a lot of, they'd been bicycling on other trips, so this group kind of knew each other, and I just kind of fell in with them, it seemed, and actually I loved it, and I realized that trip was never on my bucket list. I never would have done it, and it would have been too challenging to do that on my own because the cultural difference is so great.
Right.
And I felt that was the first time it opened my eyes to see the benefits of traveling in a group, because again, it was van supported, and it was culturally very, very different, and it felt, when we would walk out of the hotel, when we'd stay in a town, we walk out of the hotel, you'd immediately be inundated with people wanting to sell you something. and it was great. They're all good entrepreneurs, but at some point you're like, no, I just want to go for a walk by myself.
Yeah. Well, so I think the thing that probably helped you out, and maybe that other people might struggle with a bit, is that you had sort of, when you have a mother who's got wanderlust, you did traveling a lot before, so you were already exposed to different cultures and kind of getting a feel for what travel was like.
Yeah.
So I wonder sometimes if it's better for somebody to get started with a group and just do these little excursions on, and maybe do a day trip on a bike or a day trip hike somewhere, just to sort of get the feelers there before.
Well, Meetup is great for that. When I first came here, I did Meetup hikes just to expose myself to the different hikes that were around, and to see what's possible. And then since then, I've found my own hikes that I do. But yeah, I think that's a good transition.
Yeah.
And I know this last year I went to, I'm a student at Lenore Ryan University, and I went to Florence on the creative writing class. And I'd been to Florence before, and it was in a class, so I thought, I don't know, it's going to be a little confined. It won't be an adventure.
Right.
And so I sent the email to a gentleman who had stayed at my bed and breakfast years before, and he lived in Russia. And I remember he said, come visit Russia. So I sent him an email and said, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. I could swing by.
Now, you're saying Florence, Italy.
Yeah.
Okay, neighborhood of Russia.
Russia,
Yeah.
I'm over on that side of the world. So
Yeah.
I found a ticket from Pisa to Moscow for $99. And he said, come. And so I had this amazing adventure in Russia that I'm going to post on my YouTube channel, Gabriella on the Road. And it's like in the style of a picaresque story of just, meeting up with people and having adventures.
Wow.
And my host, Alexei, is a banker, and his family has a country home. And he said, you can stay in my country home, and here's the bicycles, and I'll introduce you to my friends. And then it was just amazing.
Yeah.
I just absolutely loved it.
So was it St. Petersburg, Moscow?
Suzdal.
Okay.
So Suzdal is a little town of only 10,000 people and over 45 churches.
Wow.
So I know all those people are going to heaven there. And it's part of what's called the Golden Ring, which is it's 4 hours northeast of Moscow.
Okay.
And so I stayed there for a week, and then someone said, oh, you must go to St. Petersburg. So I said, okay. And so then I went to St. Petersburg and had amazing adventures there, but nothing that was quite the gem of being in Suzdal and the people I met there and that lived there, that just were over the top amazing.
I think that's the thing that I discovered too, is that it is going to You can go, like Czech Republic, you can go to Prague. Everybody goes to Prague.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city.
Yeah.
It's an amazing place to go. But it's not till you hit the smaller towns that you sort of get a feel for what the Czech Republic really is. And, it'd be the same as traveling around the United States. I mean, you can go to New York City, but we're all not like people from New York City. It's those smaller towns that you really get kind of the cultural mix. And understand what makes a place tick.
Yep, and you really get to connect, I think, and it's getting that sense of place. And sometimes when I travel, I think, oh, I could live here. And when I get to that point, I think, oh, I could live here. And I think, I really feel like I've just connected.
Yeah. So of all the places that you've been, where's the place that you haven't been that you really would love to go? Where you feel like you get a good cultural exposure to something that you've always been interested in?
Well, I think I'd like to bicycle Asia, and I haven't been to that. I mean, I've been to India, but I haven't done other parts over there. And Thailand the food is really good, and I love tropical fruits, and so that's of interest to me. And Turkey, I'm just fascinated with Turkey. That I'd like to bicycle across Turkey and around the coast. And I do want to do the rivers. I do want to bicycle the rivers in Germany. And I want to bicycle across southern France. And so I think kind of what I'm thinking now is that if it's very steep, I'm gonna hike. And if it's flat and longer distance, I'll do that on a bike. So I'll alternate between the two, and I'll have my fold-up bike, and I could just leave that at places, and I don't know, it'll work out. I'll figure it out as I go along.
Right.
Yeah.
You always find an Uber somewhere to get you. I laugh because I was at Bryce Canyon, and as we walked down, I was looking and I was going, I'm not walking all the way down there. And I started walking my way down and had great conversations with people as I was walking along. And I get down to the bottom, and I was talking to a guy from Chicago, and he said, "Yeah, it's too bad you can't just call an Uber down here." Oh, I'm sorry, we're out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of a national park. It's gonna be a little hard to get an Uber.
But sometimes you can. I've hitchhiked, and I was in Ireland, and I had just bicycled up. It was I can't remember what town I was in, but I just had a really strenuous bicycling the day before, and then the next day I went to go visit the chocolate factory. And I thought, I'll give the bicycle a break today. And I stuck out my thumb and hitchhiked, and ended up being picked up by a couple from the United States, from the Midwest.
Oh, wow. Have you had this situation? When I travel around, I'm in the Czech Republic, and everybody starts talking to me in English as soon as they walk up to me. It's like, do I look like I'm American? I don't.
Well, I don't normally have that experience. I know when I was in Russia, I bought a Russian jacket. I needed more warmth, and people would come up and ask me something in Russian. So I don't wear blue jeans. I always wear a skirt. I think because of how I dress, I can blend in, and so I think I don't stand out as a foreigner as long as I don't open my mouth. But when I do, everybody speaks English. It's sometimes it's a little disappointing. Because, I want to practice this language, or like for me, I like to speak German. And I say, okay, you can speak to me in English, and I'll talk to you in German because I want to practice.
That's good. Yeah, I did that with France. I would use a little of my French, and then they would speak back to me in English, and they'd practice on their end too. Oh,
and everybody says, "Oh, excuse my poor English," and you're going like, no, I think your English is better than mine.
Yeah. The fun part was I went to Dresden, and because I look German, I'm of German heritage. I walked into the hotel, and I went to the reception desk, and I said. What did I say? See, my words escape me as I'm Guten Tag. And as soon as after I said that, then I started speaking in English, and the woman looked at me so funny, and I went through all the Czech Republic, and people would speak to me in English, and I got to Germany, and the woman's looking at me like, "You're putting me on, right? You speak German." And I was because I look German.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting situation to have happen. But yeah, I walked out of a restaurant in the Czech Republic, and a woman started speaking to me in English, And I just finally said, just let me know, why is it that people start talking to me in English? And she said, universal language.
Oh, right.
And I went, yeah, that makes sense. And
if you're not sure, that's the language you would start with.
Yeah. And I learned that in Czech Republic talking to my Airbnb host. He said, in Czech Republic, if you're talking to someone who's native and they're over a certain age, say 35, 40, they're probably going to know Russian as their second language. Right. But if they're younger, they're going to know English.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that takes the fear factor out of traveling as well, is that sometimes you can do the body language thing and you can have a conversation with somebody who doesn't speak your language, but you can kind of get by.
Yeah, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, exactly. There's another obstacle to get over, but it kind of feels like an accomplishment after you navigate your way through all of that stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. I heard you say something about taking or doing your bicycling along the Elbe River, which is a trip that I took, but I took it in a car until I couldn't take it any further because they said no cars allowed. But some beautiful areas through there. How far along the Elbe did you go?
I just did it was around 200 kilometers.
Okay.
And then it was, I think. I cut that short a little bit because I wanted to be in Dresden for the full moon. Because I wanted to get a picture on the bridge in Dresden under the full moon. Okay. And so I got to the town where I ended, and then the next day I took the train to Dresden, and I got there to get that shot of under the full moon on that bridge.
Nice. Had it in mind. So the question is, did you see cranes everywhere? Because when I went to Dresden, that's all I saw were cranes. There was the whole town is under construction.
Yeah, I didn't notice that so much.
No? Yeah, the bridge was actually even under construction when I went.
Not when I was there.
I mean, it's such a revitalization of that town going on.
Yeah.
And they're doing their best to keep it as true to what it was pre-war. Yeah. Yeah. Which is amazing.
And that's why I want to, bicycle more of the rivers, because I enjoyed that bicycle ride so much. And then my theory is, I wouldn't get lost so often. But, when I'm out in the woods, every trail looks attractive. And you think, well, I could take that trail, I could take that trail. But when you're bicycling on a river, you're kind of like, well, I guess I could, that's kind of a good guidepost. I'll stay along that river.
Right. Do you just take paper maps with you, or how do you? Okay.
Yeah, I do paper.
Yeah. GPS is kind of still iffy.
Oh, you're out in the middle of the woods. There's no GPS.
Yeah. I found it interesting that my GPS would follow me all through actually I lost it coming into Dresden. But I guess I had to just reboot my phone because it came back. But I was so nervous about losing the maps that I had. But at least Google lets you download the maps. And the GPS always seemed to work when I was in. But yeah, not knowing when you're hiking, you're not going to be anywhere near a road. So
Right. Yeah. Well, one time when I was where I ended my trip in Tübingen, the town before that, my back went out. And I was staying in this pension, and I got up, and I immediately fell down, and my back went out. And I think I'd eaten too much poppy seed cake. So I had a little too much sugar in my diet. But anyway, that was a joke. My trip was fueled with poppy seed cake and coffee, because I love poppy seed cake. And but anyway, I got on my phone, and I had the German telephone book in my phone. So I called up, this is actually a Sunday, and I called up a chiropractor, and left a message. Oh, can I come see you tomorrow? And that was going to be in Bayreuth, and the next town. And he actually called me back and said, I'm closed tomorrow, but I will come in and see you, as I was a traveler and just coming through. And then so I had the train schedule on my phone, and I could say I could be there at 12 noon because I could look up the train schedule. So I take through technology, I got to Bayreuth, and then I looked up Google Maps and walked to his office, and I could do all that with being with the phone. It was just amazing.
Yeah, technology has come a long way. I try to think of. It's great when you have it. Like, for instance, in Prague, I could just I could look at my phone. It would tell me how far to walk, which bus I needed to pick up, or which tram I needed to pick up, and then I would be there. Timing was great. However, the time that I was in Austria, in Vienna, And I woke up in the morning and my GPS was, the GPS would show, but the maps weren't working. And I'm leaving at 6 a.m. and I have to navigate the entire town of Vienna to get to the other side to get on a freeway that doesn't go straight through town.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, one hand, and you've got to shift because there's not a lot of automatic transmissions over there. And so I'm doing everything you're not supposed to do with a phone. I'm just thumbing it to keep the screen alive so that I can see what street that I'm going down next to get. Yeah, it was an adventure. And then again, it was the same thing. Reboot the phone, and all of a sudden everything came back. But I was too nervous to reboot it, so I had to go back to all my map reading skills on a phone that didn't show me street names, but at least would show me that there was a street there, and it might get me out of town.
Right. and that was challenging also in walking, is sometimes, finding your way through towns. But the nice thing about walking is it's just easy to ask directions.
Right.
And because there's always someone around.
Yeah. The fun part is when you're in a foreign town and somebody asks you for directions.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, I felt so bad because I told this guy, which I thought, well, yeah, I'll help him. I got my phone and GPS. Well, I was turned around and I sent him in the wrong direction. Aww. And I realized it about 2 minutes after he walked away, and I was like, I almost want to chase him down and find him, but I know he's so far ahead of me now that
he'll ask somebody else.
He'll ask somebody else and get it figured out. So, all right. So then the big question that probably everybody's throwing through their mind is, how do you afford to do all the travel and all that stuff?
I just charge it. No.
Well, that's another episode. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, then I pay it off.
Yeah.
But I travel cheaply because my biggest expense is airfare.
Okay.
And I look for good airfare rates. And when I get to a country, I'll stay in hostels, in inexpensive pensions, and I've done wild camping. I'll take a tent with me.
Okay.
And then I don't have to pay for transportation because I'm fueled by my legs or a bicycle, and so then my only really big expense is food. And in traveling in Europe, I find I always ate really, really well. And in Ireland, every day it was whatever local soup they had and soda bread. And I kind of like pick a theme and that's it.
Yeah. I probably need to ask you more questions about Ireland because that's a trip that I have coming up, Ireland and Scotland. So that'll be fun. And you're making me think maybe I should investigate a bike, because the only time I've done a bike trip is I've done city tours. And it is fun to go on, like Montreal, I did a bike tour, and you do kind of get a little bit more of a feel for the town at a faster pace than on your feet.
Yeah.
So you can do it in a day, but...
When I did all the peninsulas, and so one side of the peninsula you're going up, 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 and then when I get to the top, I go, now it's the glorious ride down, and it was just like, yes. And in Ireland, I would go to the pub in the evening for tea, and at one place this couple said, "Oh, you must bicycle Sheepshead Peninsula," and I hadn't planned on it. And because whenever someone says you must do so and so, I always do that, and that turned out to be the best ride on the trip. And then someone else said to me before I left, they said, "Oh, you must go to Dingle," and so I did, and I ended up cutting that trip short in Dingle because it's such a cool, hip town with so much music. I thought I'm just gonna spend the rest of my time here, and I'm taking the bus back the rest of the way. But it's when people say that, I always listen, and it always ends up being a highlight.
That's awesome.
And then I'm flexible because I don't make reservations, so it doesn't matter if I change my plans or go a different place or whatever.
Yeah, I do those non-refundable reservations to save some money, and then I go on a trip and I'm like, why did I do that? Because there's stuff I'd like to sneak in here. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's, if somebody was wanting to get started on doing solo travel, what would be, let's say, female, 24 years old, kind of wants to see the world, but doesn't really know how to get out there. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, I would have to say, it's really all about your curiosity and what gives you a spark, what excites you of on the world map. Where to be really excited and curious about going to. So I think that's the first thing, and then the second thing is you book your airfare, and then you could find a hostel to stay for your first night and make that reservation. And then you just talk to people in the hostel, and they'll tell you where to go.
Nice.
And I think that's all you need is just do those, book that airfare, book that first night, and then just allow it to unfold from there. Because people are always happy to say, oh, go here or go there and check this out. In hostels, you meet other travelers, and they'll say, oh, join us for this outing. And that's what the whole world of hosteling is about.
Right.
And so that's what I do if I'm going to some place that I haven't been to before, and I'll usually book the first night in a hostel.
Okay. And then the idea of overcoming that fear of doing that, because stepping your foot out into that kind of travel for the very first time could be a little daunting,
Yeah.
I would say.
Well, I went through that the first time when I was in Barcelona, and I was getting ready to get on the train to go to Irun, where I was going to be beginning my walk. And I remember being in the hotel, and I just had this fear come over my body. And I just said, okay, I'm just going to sit down, and I'm going to sit with this fear, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't know anything about this. I don't know.
Right.
But so I allowed myself to feel that. I said, okay, done. And then got up and got on the train and ended up in Irun, and then the rest was a wonderful adventure. So I allow myself I acknowledge that I'm allowed to feel fearful about it, but it's not going to stop me. It's there. I acknowledge it, and then I move on. And so I think that helps to say I'm not going to push it away, and sometimes a little bit of fear is good, because that can kind of propel you to say, well, I'm not going to stay stuck in this.
Right.
I got to go.
Yeah.
And then you that's how you get past it, I think.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that you need to realize that if you're going to be ruled by your fear, you're never going to do anything.
And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's to me, fear is a test.
Yeah. And I think fear is really excitement. Excitement is that heightened emotion without fear. So the flip side of fear is excitement.
It's interesting you say that. I was going through very stressful times in my younger years, and I read a book, and it said that when somebody jumps out of an airplane, they experience this incredible fear. And it's just this feeling that pulses through their body. Right. And as soon as they pull the ripcord, and that chute opens up, then all of a sudden they feel this massive elation and this feeling coursing through their body. And the interesting thing is that that's adrenaline. And it's just the label that we put on it.
You just flip that switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that sometimes we tend to fear things and make them out to be bigger than they actually are.
Well, and the other thing is I find I don't listen to other people's fear. And so I can tell you that people will, when I travel solo, people would say, aren't you afraid? I mean, I hear that so much. I finally said, well, I don't watch TV and I don't eat meat, so I didn't get that fear thing.
Right.
And they didn't know how to respond to that. So I just had to say something, because, it doesn't always need to be the first reaction to things.
Right.
And sometimes I have to redirect conversations to say, well, don't rain on my parade, don't burst my bubble, and I want you to be a cheerleader, but I don't need to hear your fear unloaded on my trip.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to talk with friends to let them know that, support me.
Yeah.
And it's your fear, it's not my fear. And you could dump it somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I think we hold ourselves. I mean, you mentioned going to Turkey. I would love to go to Turkey.
Yeah.
I talked to someone recently at a convention who told me about he lived in Istanbul for many years, and I just wanted to ask him so many questions about it, because we get news and we get reports and we're told, that's probably not a place you want to travel, and this isn't a place you want to travel, and it feels like we could really restrict ourselves on people's on other people's fears.
Exactly. And the reality is you get out into the hinterlands, you get out into the country, and not everybody's plugged into the horrible political situations.
Right.
There's just real people out there,
Yeah.
and they're inviting and welcoming, and that's in any country is like that, I think.
Yeah. I think it's just a matter of keeping your antenna up and understanding whether that fear is actually logically placed, or if it's just something that's keeping you from doing what you want
Right.
to do.
And I recognize when that comes up, it's usually self-imposed.
Yeah.
Instead of some real external threat.
Right.
It's usually the former.
Nice. This has been wonderful. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I know this answers probably a lot of questions in people's heads, and also hopefully gets them going, maybe this isn't as difficult as
just
I
do
think
it.
it is. Break the barriers down,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So first journey starts with a single step, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
this applies here. Well, I thank you definitely for your time and all your insights on stuff. It's
Drew, it's been a
fantastic having
pleasure.
you. Yeah,
Thank you.
and maybe next year when you get done with your Continental Divide trip, I'm sure you will have lots of stories to tell from that. Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you very much. And how, if somebody wants to see your video and all that, we can actually post your links up on our show links page, so they can see it through our site, travelfuelslife.com, or
Gabriella on the Road.
Gabriel on the Road, and it's gabrielontheroad.com.
Yep. I don't have my website up yet, but right now I'm on YouTube
Okay,
on the same Gabriella on the Road.
very good.
And it's Gabriele.
All right,
There's
yes.
many different spellings
I
of
was
that.
Going to say, I keep wanting to put the second L
Right,
in there.
right.
Very good. Well, Gabriella, I definitely enjoyed this all the way around, and I look forward to hearing more about your travels down the road.
Awesome. Thank you.
What a great guest. I mean, we had a pretty good discussion ahead of the recording, and I really wish I'd have hit the record button and been able to capture some of that, because she has such great insights. And really, like I say, the idea of inspiring you to get out there and do things that are outside your comfort zone, because, travel's not supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be fun. And yes, sometimes there are things that will make you nervous, or maybe you've got a barrier of fear that you need to get over. But man, when you do it, it's just liberating. It really is. So, Gabriella, I appreciate you being on the show. And I am going to post on our show notes page any of the links that we talked about, but also links to her YouTube channel. And as soon as her website is done, we will post a link out to that as well. So make sure that you check that out. It's at travelfuelslife.com, and you can just go under the podcasts tab, and you should be able to find it through there. Now, I am going to jump ahead. That's right. This is episode 1. We're going to talk about episode 3, because I want you to know about episode 3 that is coming up in about a week, and we're going to be following in the footsteps of a traveler, friend of mine, who actually ended up taking almost the same trip I took through the American Southwest, except he did it with no carbon footprint. And so we're going to find out how he did that, and that's coming up in episode 3. But in between, in episode 2, we're going to do something very unique. Usually, when you listen to a podcast, an early episode is going to be devoted to a monologue of the host saying, hey, here's who I am, and here's what the show is about. I thought, why don't we do it a little bit different? Actually, I didn't think about it. My special guest host is the one that came up with this idea, and I think it's fantastic. So it's a chance for you to get introduced to me and the show. That'll be in episode 2 coming up. So until we meet again, I am Drew Hanisch, and thanks for listening to Travel Fuels Life. And remember to step outside that comfort zone and enjoy the journey.